Good afternoon, everybody. It's always fun having the panel after lunch because right about now is when the food coma starts to set in. Everyone gets a little drowsy and sleepy, so hopefully we'll keep this conversational. My name is Chris Meek. I'm from Stamford, Connecticut. I was doing some research on the event last year, and the moderator for this panel last year was Andy Card, who, as most, if not all of you know, was President Bush's chief of staff on 9/11. So as I'm watching the video from last year, I'm thinking, how in the hell does Chris Meek from Stamford, Connecticut get to be chosen to fill his shoes? So I'm going to try and do my best, but fortunately we have an amazing panel here to have this conversation. I'm not going to tell much about my story, but I was at Ground Zero on 9/11. At the time I was running floor trading operations for a division of Goldman Sachs, and I had a team in the American Stock Exchange, which is across the street, at 4 World Trade, and at the New York Stock Exchange, and my office was at 115 Broadway. And has anybody here ever been to New York City or Lower Manhattan? Okay, good, most of you. So is anyone here a New York Mets fan or a Boston Red Sox fan? Okay, just so you know, that's a phase, you're gonna outgrow it. Is anyone here a New York Yankees fan? All right, you're all in my will, congratulations. So my office overlooked Broadway, and what they call that is the Canyon of Heroes. And that's where they would have ticker tape parades for presidents, for astronauts, and for your world champion New York Yankees. And so on 9/11, I was in my office building on a conference call with my boss in Chicago. And if you've been to New York City, you know, you hear lots of big noises. And on that morning, there was a large bang. And it sounded like an empty garbage truck hitting a pothole. And all of a sudden, I'm out with my boss in Chicago, and he says, oh my God, a plane hit the World Trade Center. And so we had a small TV in the office, and most of my teams were already down in the exchanges, and we look and we're like, well, what the hell's happening? And so all of a sudden, we start watching the TV, and I'm literally across the street. And because of the delay on the TV, we could hear the plane, the second plane coming, before you see it on TV. Second plane hits. We now know that something's going on. The maintenance for the building says, okay, the building's shut down, the elevators are shut down, you now need to evacuate. So there's only 4 of us upstairs, so we go down. One of the guys from my team was a offensive lineman at Yale for football team, had just had knee surgery, so it took 3 of us to go down 19 floors of stairs, which was the least of our concerns. Got him out, put him in a cab. I now had to get 27 people out of 3 buildings. Most of them were across the street in the World Trade Center, or I'm sorry, in the American Stock Exchange. But first I went to the corner directly across from the World Trade Center. And I look up and see the debris, everyone's running away. And my 2 most vivid memories from that day, one is of the hundreds of first responders rushing into the towers while thousands of people, if not tens of thousands, are rushing the opposite direction. And 2, are of people jumping. That was their best option. The last memory and most vivid memory I have of that day is a young woman falling and holding her dress down for her last act of dignity. Now, I never had the honor of wearing our nation's uniform like a lot of you are right there. But I've seen war. I saw what we fight for and we were defending. You're gonna hear from some great Americans today. And I started something a year or so ago with the help of Lieutenant General Marc Sasseville up here, you'll hear from him, called the 9/11 Legacy Foundation. And we have 2 facets. The first is to help elevate the events of the 25th commemoration of the terrorist attacks of 9/11 next year. We have a film coming out next year called The Heroism and Resiliency of 9/11. As awful as that day was, a lot of heroism and resiliency came from that. It showed how great we are as a country and as Americans. You can learn more at the 911film.com. All proceeds from the film are going to support veteran nonprofits, so we're not making any money on this. Gary Sinise from the Sinise Foundation is doing the narration for the film. People like Andy Card, Leon Panetta, folks like that are in the film, so that'll be released next year. But also our job is to educate future generations like yourself. In 2023, there were dozens of videos made, posted on TikTok, supporting, showing sympathy and empathy for Osama bin Laden's 2002 letter to America, supporting his killing and murdering of thousands of Americans, supporting anti-Semitic remarks. That's a travesty. Also that same year, Pew Research, a nonpartisan, bipartisan think tank, put out a report that 1 in 5 Gen Zers, ages 18 to 29, this room, have empathy or sympathy towards Osama bin Laden. We vowed as a nation to never forget, and that's exactly what we are doing. My job is to take that never forget mantra and transition it for your generation and future generations into we remember. And that's what this panel is about. And so I encourage you to listen to what these great people, great Americans have to say. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to the panel. I'd like to ask each individual on the panel to introduce themselves, their role in 9/11 and where they were. We'll start with you, General.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. I'll answer the question, but before I do, I would like to provide a little bit of context. I was a member of a squadron, inside of a group, inside of a wing. Everybody was involved in the response on a base of which everybody was involved in our response in a very difficult time. And so I don't want my response to make it sound like I was out there by my own, doing my own thing. There were a lot of people involved in getting airplanes ready, making sure that they had fuel, making sure that they had oxygen, going out and getting other people and bringing them to help with what became our response to that attack. So my wingman and I took off that day. We were the people in the air. We do a few of these, we've done more than a few actually, but really it's those people that made all of that happen. And then one more thing, you'll also hear about Flight 93, I think, at some point. Those are the real heroes, in my opinion, for that day, and I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about that. But the people that took control of that airplane and made sure that it was not a fourth airplane that hit into either our financial structure or government buildings, those are the real heroes, the families that they left behind. So I'd just like to acknowledge that. As Dr. Meek said, my name is Marc Sasseville. I was a lieutenant colonel on that day responding. I was the operations officer in charge. And long story short, we were not part of a planned response. It just happened in our area, and we all swung into action and knew that we had to do something. So I'll stop there.
Okay. Hi, good afternoon all. And I'm Lieutenant Clarence Singleton, New York City Fire Department, retired. And I had retired from the New York City Fire Department the year before, August 30th of 2000. But I had a part-time job, and I was out working it on September 11. And I heard over the radio in my car that plane hit towers. So I said, probably a small plane veered off course. Then after a while, I heard a second announcement saying second plane hit towers. I said, no, something going on terrorist-wise. So I went back to my house, put on a fire department T-shirt, went with the Maltese cross, and I went over to the scene. When I got there, there was all kind of debris on the ground, and you name it, it was there. And sometimes the towers line up, one directly behind the other. So I saw this big jagged piece of metal, but my brain just wasn't grasping anything. And I said, well, maybe that's some kind of work of art. And my intention was, I came in from, I'll just say, the land side, because the river is right there also. And my intention was, I said, well, the staging area is probably on the opposite side of the building, my approach. So as I was walking over to, that's the North Tower, which was still standing, I heard this voice, clear voice, said, stay here and work with these guys. There was one firefighter trying to connect to his hose to the engine, and a civilian passed, and the firefighter asked the civilian to open up the hydrant for him. And it's a funny little wrench. And so when I heard that, that caused me to go back and open the hydrant for this guy, for the chauffeur. And shortly after that, we were extinguishing fires, and we heard this loud bang like something let go. And instinct told us that the tower was collapsing, and we bolted. I'm going to make this quick. I ran about, I'm assuming, 30 feet, and I fell. And but I'll tell you what. On the morning of September 11, 2001, I never knew I could run so fast. I was picking them up and putting them down. But when I was on the floor, I was trying to get out of the area. And I remember, I'm just tell you this little portion quickly. I came to a wall. This is for veterans, any veterans around. The wall was too tall for me to scale because I only have one arm. And I backed up a little bit, and I went to my left. It was a shorter wall. I managed to scale it with one arm. And I looked down 3 steps, and I saw the fire marshal I was working with earlier, and he looked at me and he said, "I see you made it." Kind of words of encouragement. And I said, "Yeah, you too." And I asked for my camera. He looked in his turnout coat pocket, that's the one with the stripes, and he said, "Oh, I dropped it. I was running for my life." I said, "Don't worry about it." He was standing in a doorway, a lot of bright lights shining through, doors with the panic bar that you might push to exit a building. And so when I left him, I saw about 3 or 4 EMS guys, and they helped me to the ambulance. Jumping ahead, I was at a Red Cross meeting, probably 35, 40 of us in a circle, high-powered therapists in between. And the lady looked at me and she said, "Clarence, I worked down there for 15 years. There are no walls like the one you described." Some of the therapists want to think that the walls that I scale was me climbing out of my foxhole when I was wounded in Vietnam as a Marine. Here's a few things. When he saw me, this fire marshal, he said, "I see you made it." When we were working together, I wasn't covered with dust. I'm in Life magazine. You've probably seen my photos before. I'm covered with dust. He wouldn't have recognized me. He couldn't have been standing in a doorway with bright light shining through when they were on the way to taking me to the ambulance. It was so dark out, they had to shine their flashlight at the street corner sign to see where we were. And there's a couple of more things that happened, but that had to have been something. My pastor had me figure, Jesus Christ, I was no more than an angel of the Lord, because they can take different forms. So I have to be kind to people, because I never know who or what I'm talking to. I'm done.
Thank you, Clarence. Bill?
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Bill Van Scoyk. Let me start by saying I'm proud to not be a Boston Red Sox fan. If you can't tell by the accent, I'm from New York. Okay, born and raised. Quick little synopsis. I work for a great company called Morgan Stanley, and I was promoted and sent down to work in the World Trade Center, ironically, on September 11th of 2000. That was my first day. And, my job was essentially to be one of 8 managers that co-ran our training area, where when people decided they wanted to become a financial advisor, they'd have to pass a series of examinations and licensing. And the way we handled it back in those days is once you passed all of those, guess what? You get a great 3-week trip to New York City to work out of the World Trade Center, where we would, train you on the Morgan Stanley philosophy and also on other things associated with the business. So we would co-run classes between the other 7 folks I work with, and we would make a head manager for a class. Ironically, as fate happened, I was the lead manager of this class, which was the largest class ever. It was 276 people. And imagine this, New York City in and of itself, under normal circumstances, is a fairly intimidating place. I know, I grew up there. So you have folks from all over this great country, that had never been to New York City before. So we're on day 2 of a 3-week training program. And I'll never forget, probably stayed out a little bit too late the night before. The Giants were playing the Broncos. Yankees were supposed to play the Red Sox, got rained out. Got home a little bit late, but I was up at 4:30 in the morning, and I'll never forget walking out. It's about 6 a.m. And I remember it was such a beautiful day. Absolutely gorgeous day. Picturesque. And I remember thinking okay, got a long day ahead. It's going to be a lot of work, but it's going to be a great day. I really feel good. This is going to be great. And we started our class. We were supposed to start at 7:45. First speaker that came in actually came in 15 minutes early, ironically. Didn't know how important that was going to be. But actually started him speaking at 7:30. And we got through his presentation, subsequently finished 15 minutes early. I put everybody on an extended break, okay? Go downstairs, get your coffee, smoke your cigarettes, do whatever you do. Okay, be back in your desk by 9. So go back to sit at my desk, all of a sudden, somebody comes into my office and they go, hey, Billy, something's going on. And I go, what do you mean? And they go, come to the back room. So I come to the back room, I look, and I was down there in 2000 when the Yankees beat the Mets, and they had a ticker tape parade. And, you know, there was confetti and all this other stuff over there. Well, this looked like the ticker tape parade from hell, because there was stuff on fire, okay, floating around. There were chairs, there were things. I'm like, okay, something obviously happened. So I made a decision to gather whoever was still on the floor back into a room, and I called our head of security, and I remember what Rick Rescorla trained us in the year that I was there for. It was a bit ambiguous. We didn't know what was going on. But I remember Rick said after the bombing, you know, it took 2 hours to get down the stairwell. And Rick, you know, God bless him, became obsessed with that afterwards and was like, leave the building. Leave the building. So my initial reaction was, leave the building. So we got everybody, you know, obviously opened up the stairwells, never take the elevator, and got everybody down the stairwells. We're about the 50th floor when the announcement was made that Building 1 was hit by an aircraft. Building 2 is secure. Go back to your desks. So people ask me, what are you going to do? I go, I don't know what you're going to do. I know what I'm going to do. I'm leaving the building. Okay? The smoke from the other building could be harmful, and we don't really know what's going on. So we can always go back in, can't always leave. Sure enough, we got hit almost immediately after I finished that sentence. And the building, just so you know, was built at the time to withstand the largest aircraft, which was a 707. My brother-in-law is a structural engineer, Cornell graduate, explained that to me. And it took the impact, and it tilted from side to side until it finally landed in the middle. I remember the only thought I had in that point, I wasn't married, but I said, man, wish I spoke to my mom that morning, okay, because I talked to her every morning. It was just a little busy on this particular morning. Didn't get a chance to do it. But people were amazingly calm, you know, given what was going on. And, you know, we were fortunate to get down to the 8th floor, which was the observatory deck, take the escalator, go downstairs. And I remember out of the corner of my eye, as I'm going down the escalator, I saw Rick Rescorla on his megaphone, you know, singing Scottish hymns or whatever he was singing, you know, saying this is a great day to be an American, and just all these positive things he's saying while all this chaos is going on. And I remember seeing him going up while I'm coming down. And anyway, we got out of the building. I went over to a police officer and I asked him, I said, you know, what do? I got a group of people here with me. He goes, honestly, he goes, get out of downtown. He goes, we heard there's a third plane coming. So told everybody the only direction I could give them, which was go back to the hotels that we house you in. The South Gate was 34th and 7th, right across from Madison Square Garden, and that was the central hotel that we kept everybody in. So I said, go there. Now, I'm not going to lie to you. In my mind, I had 3 options. I lived across the street, and at that point, I didn't realize how bad things were. I was like, I could just go back to my apartment, you know, grab a bottle of Grey Goose and watch the news, okay? 2, I could walk back to my parents. They lived in Yonkers, about 20 miles away. I'll walk on the FDR, I'll go home. Or 3, I could do the right thing, which is walk back to the hotel and help these people out that, again, some of them have never been to New York before, and try to figure this chaos out. Obviously, it took a millisecond to make the right decision, which was that decision. So that's what I did. And obviously, when you come out of that, there's a lot of things I'll share with you. There are things I will not, because I don't want to put them in your head. But obviously, I saw, you know, some pretty graphic and terrible stuff. But I remember walking, and I started walking towards Canal Street, going east. Figured I'd go east and then go up. And I don't know, maybe 15 minutes after I'm out of the building, you felt this rumble. I thought we were having an earthquake on top of everything else. And I turn around and I look, and it was the building coming down. and it fell like a house of cards. There's a tremendous plume of smoke, okay, that came out, and I just remember looking like, I can't believe what I just saw. But there's a job that needs to be had, and I need to do something. So I walked back to the hotels. Took a little while. The hotel set me up in a command center, and we didn't have anything. Everything went down with the Trade Center. So, you know, we had to basically go by the hotel registries. We spent 2.5 days accounting for every single person that we possibly could, and I'm proud to say we got 276 people in that building, and we got 276 people out of that building. And the experiences from that day, I just can't convey to you. I hope and pray that these conversations and these events really put at the forefront just how fortunate we all are to live in this great country, how quickly that could be taken away. And people call 9/11 a tragedy. It was not a tragedy. It was a mass homicide. There were 3,000 people killed. Okay? If it weren't for Rick Rescorla, would have been a lot more people killed from my neck of the woods. So.
Thank you. Michael?
Sir?
Hi. Oh, is it coming on?
Yep.
Hello? I'm not here yet. Let's try that. There we go. I'm Mike Hingson, and no offense to any of the folks up here, but being from California, I am a 2-time World Series Dodger fan.
Well played. Well played.
Had to say it. So my story in some ways parallels, in some ways differs from what you've heard so far, because on September 11th, 2001, I was the Mid-Atlantic Region sales manager for a computer company, Quantum ATL. We sold the tape backup products that people use to back up all of their computer data. And I was hired to open an office, and by the time all was said and done, the office was opened in August of 2000 on the 78th floor of Tower 1, the North Tower of the World Trade Center. And that's where I was on September 11th. And when the plane hit, as you've already heard, the building swayed. If you imagine my arm as the building just tipped and tipped. I don't know how far we moved. I tell people we moved maybe 20 feet on the 78th floor. But by the time it had stopped moving, I had said goodbye to a colleague of mine, David Frank, and I'll tell you about David in a minute. David was in the office with me. We had some guests in our office, early arrivals, because we were going to be doing sales training, teaching our reseller partners how to sell our products. And when the building finally stopped moving, David and I had just said goodbye to each other because we thought we were going to take a 78th floor plunge to the street. But the building then tipped back the other way, and by the time it got vertical again, we knew at least we weren't going to be broken off and falling to the stairs. I went back into my office because I was standing in the doorway to my office at the time, and I met my guide dog, who was my 5th guide dog, Roselle, coming out from under my desk where she had been asleep. I took her leash, I told her to heel, which meant to come around on my left side and sit, and about the time she got around and she sat, the building dropped straight down about 6 feet. And the reason it did is because the building is constructed, as any structural engineer will tell you, tall buildings are constructed with expansion joints, so they're made to sway, and you already heard, the building was made to be hit by a pretty heavy aircraft, and it wasn't the aircraft itself that caused the buildings to collapse, it was the exploding full loads of jet fuel that destroyed enough of the infrastructure that made the difference and the buildings collapsed. In any case, so the building was hit. We didn't know it at the time. David, as soon as the building stopped moving altogether, turned and looked out the window, and I heard things brushing by our window, and he started shouting, "Oh my God, Mike, there's fire and smoke above us. The millions of pieces of burning paper falling outside our window. We got to get out of here right now." And I said, "Slow down, David." And he said, "No, we got to get out of here. The building's on fire." "No, David, slow down. We'll get out." No, we got to get out of here right now. The building's on fire." And finally, he used what I call the big line. "You don't understand. You can't see it."
Oh, God.
Let's be real clear. Superman and X-ray vision are fictitious. People tell me all the time, of course, you didn't know what happened because you didn't see the airplane hit the building. Yeah, I was on the 78th floor, and the building was hit between floors 93 and 99 on the other side of the building. The last I heard, nobody could see through 18 floors of metal, rebar, and concrete, right? The bottom line is, I didn't know, no one knew. And it's important for me to also point out that, contrary to what people believe, guide dogs do not lead blind people, and Roselle, my guide dog, didn't lead me out of the building. The dog's job is to know not where to go, but to rather make sure that we walk safely. It's my job to know where to go and how to get there. And I travel the world literally these days doing public speeches, talking about teamwork and trust and leadership, talking about my story. And one of the things that I have to do constantly is to re-educate people a little bit about blindness. Blindness isn't the problem. You light-dependent sighted bigots are the real problem. You have as much a disability as I do, except that since Thomas Edison and others invented the electric light bulb, the bottom line is that we're covering up your disability by giving you light on demand in so many different ways. But it doesn't change the fact that you have a disability. My disability is light independence, which is not a problem sometimes. Anyway, one of the things that I had done prior to September 11th was spent a lot of time learning all I could about what to do in an emergency, learning how the World Trade Center worked, talking to police people, Port Authority, security people, emergency preparedness, fire people, and I knew what to do in an emergency. And when we finally, when David used the line that he used, it was obvious he wasn't seeing what I was seeing, which was a dog sitting next to me, wagging her tail, going, "Who the heck woke me up anyway? I was sleeping real good here, folks." And so I knew what was not going on. That is, there wasn't something so imminent that it was bothering Roselle, and I knew what Roselle was like when she was afraid, because she was afraid of thunderstorms. But the bottom line is that, as I said, what I was observing was how Roselle was behaving, and I finally got David to focus. I said, "Get our guests to the stairs, do not let them take elevators, and then come back and we'll sweep the offices and we'll leave." He did that. I called my wife Karen on the phone at our home out in Westfield, New Jersey. Long before the media got the story, I told her there had been an explosion or something we didn't know anymore. She, of course, wanted to know more, but I had no more to tell her. And so the bottom line is, as I said, I use that a lot, don't I? Bottom line. Anyway, the reality is that what happened was that I got David to focus, and he took our guests to the stairs. He came back, we swept the offices, we went to the stairs, and we started down. Almost immediately, we began smelling an odor, and it was familiar. I could just not place what it was. It took me 4 floors to realize I was smelling the fumes from burning jet fuel. I never expected it in the World Trade Center, but that's what I was smelling. And I observed it to other people around me, and they went, "Yeah, you're right, it's burning jet fuel. We must have been hit by an airplane." But we didn't know, but we assumed because of what we smelled. We went all the way down the stairs. Boy, am I so glad we were going down and not up. But we went down the stairs, and I wish I had more time to tell the whole story. It really takes an hour to do this well. But we met firefighters coming up the stairs, we interacted, and bottom line is, by the time all was said and done, we got to the bottom, we got out into the lobby, and there was a guy on a bullhorn going, "Go this way, no, don't go outside, don't go outside, don't go that way, go this way." And it was clearly, as I learned later, because people were jumping and it would have put them below where the plane hit anyway. We were escorted by a guy from the FBI through the whole complex. I asked him what was going on. He wouldn't tell me. I wish he had. It might have made differences in the decisions that we made. I love information. And the reality is, because of all that I had learned, a mindset had kicked in, and I knew what to do in an emergency, but he didn't know that. He didn't know that I wasn't going to be bothered if he said terrorist hijacked an airplane and it hit the towers. So he didn't say anything, and we got to the stairs, going up to the 2nd floor, an escalator actually by Borders Books, and finally made it outside. We got outside, David looked around and said, "Mike, there's fire in the 2nd tower." We didn't feel anything. We didn't have any idea that Tower 2 had been hit. All we thought was maybe the fire had jumped across from our tower. We didn't know. We walked over to Broadway, walked north on Broadway. We were at Vesey Street. David said, "I want to take pictures of the fire in Tower 2 because we're real close." He took out his camera and was doing that. I tried to call my wife Karen. I couldn't get through because of all of the people who were obviously saying goodbye to loved ones that we learned about later. I had just put my phone away, and David was putting his camera away when a police officer yelled, "Get the hell out of here, it's coming down now!" And it was just this sound that I describe as kind of a combination of a freight train and a waterfall. You could hear glass breaking, you could hear metal clattering, and then the building pancaking straight down. David turned, he ran, he was gone. Everybody was running in different directions. I knew that we couldn't continue forward because that would have put us in more danger. I literally lifted Roselle by the harness, turned her around 180 degrees, and we started running back the way we came. As soon as I started to run, I thought to myself, God, I can't believe that you got us out of a building just to have one fall on us. And at that point, I heard, as clearly as you hear me talking about voices, a voice that said, don't worry about what you can't control. Focus on running with Roselle, and the rest will take care of itself. And I had this absolute sense of conviction that if we worked together, we would be fine. We got to the next street, which was Fulton Street. There was debris falling all around us. A couple small pieces of concrete had hit me in the left ear. There was a building on my right side, Broadway on my left. We were going south at this point. I turned right on Fulton Street, ran about 25 yards, caught up to David. And after catching up to David, he apologized because he had just run off, and I said, come on, David, don't worry about it. So we kept running. We got caught in the dust cloud. We ended up going into the Fulton Street subway station where we met some other people, and we stayed there for a while, and then a police officer came and said, get out of here, it's clear up above. So we went back upstairs, and David saw Tower 2 had collapsed. We continued to walk west on Fulton Street and walked for a while, and then we heard the freight train waterfall sound again, and Tower 1 was clearly collapsing. After that, I called my wife, and this time she told us how 2 aircraft had deliberately been crashed in the towers, 1 to the Pentagon, and a 4th was still missing over Pennsylvania. That's all we knew at that time. I wish, as I said, there was more time to tell the whole story. Today, I travel and speak full-time, talking about teamwork and trust. I love to do it, and I will give my commercial if anybody needs a speaker. Would love to chat with you about it. But I will tell you that for me, selling life and philosophy is a whole lot more fun than managing a computer hardware sales team and managing and selling computer hardware. So I do it, and I enjoy it. And I really am honored to be here as part of this today and with this great panel. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. Before we go back to the panelists, I just want to highlight that, what both General Sasseville and Michael mentioned is Flight 93. And that's also, I think, one of the stories that's often most overlooked. It's not New York City, it's not the Pentagon, it's a field in Pennsylvania where 40 brave Americans made the ultimate sacrifice. None of them wearing a uniform. So we just have to remember that, as Bill mentioned, you saw the best in humanity, you saw the worst in humanity that day, and that was the best in humanity, and so they need the recognition that they deserve, their families. I was telling the story earlier to Bill before this, that there was a woman on the plane, Linda Grancolis, from California. Her husband's name is Jack. And they'd been trying to get pregnant for a long time with their first child. And she was pregnant. And her grandmother had passed away, and she'd flown back to New Jersey for the funeral for her grandmother and decided to stay back home in New Jersey for a few extra days just to share some good news with the family about the coming birth of their new child. And so she was getting ready to head back home to California with her husband, Jack. And good news, she'd happened to get on an earlier flight. That flight was Flight 93. And she was on the plane when things started to happen on the flight. She had called her husband, Jack, and again, it was 7 a.m. California time. He was still in bed. She left a message on the phone saying, hey, honey, it's me. Are you there? Pick up. There's something going on the plane, but everything's going to be okay, and I just want you to know that I love you. And that recording still exists. And the FBI tried to take it. Jack said, can you promise me I'll get this back? They said no, and he said, there's no way in hell you're taking this. And Linda's name is on the memorial at Flight 93 in Shanksville, and underneath her name it says Linda Grancolis and her unborn child. And so you just think about that legacy. So all of our panelists have extremely well-documented stories, and they just shared a few minutes about that. And I know we're coming up on time, and I know that our drill sergeant is going to come and give me the hook here shortly. But with the time we have left, I would like to ask each panelist, one specific thing from that day that stands out the most to them, and then also, what's one lasting thing, as we're approaching the 25th commemoration next year, and I keep using the word commemoration or observance. I don't use the word anniversary because an anniversary is a celebration. The terrorist attacks of 9/11 is nothing to be an anniversary or a celebration about. It's something to be remembered. And with that, first I want to go to you, General.
Thank you, Dr. Meeks. If you didn't hear it at the beginning, he talked about the 9/11 Legacy Foundation, which he is heading up. I'm honored to be associated with the effort. Look it up as we get into the 25th year of remembrance next year, and thank you for your efforts with that. I'll tell you, one of the things that stands out the most in my mind as I'm leaving Andrews Air Force Base, 10 miles from here on that morning, I flew over the Pentagon. My wingman from the DC National Guard is not far behind me. I'm flying over about 5,000 or 6,000 feet over the Pentagon looking down. I'm not in the smoke, but I can smell the fumes coming into the cockpit. So yes, it's a fighter. I've got a helmet and an oxygen mask on, but the airplane takes in ambient air, so it's not a closed loop system. I can smell it. I can smell the fuel. I can smell the concrete burning. I can smell the bodies that are probably mixed up in that. And that's one of the most significant things that I will remember, because that went right to my gut. It was a punch. We've been attacked. This was an act of war. People don't talk about it like that, but it was an act of war. We were attacked, and it really bothers me that people don't seem to put it in that context. They attacked our critical infrastructure, and we were not ready. And so to take forward in terms of legacy, everybody in here in uniform, I see quite a few of you, thank you for taking on the mantle, and thank you for deciding to participate in the defense of the nation some way. The enemies are still out there. The next attack won't be in an airplane. It'll be a cyber attack. It'll be an electromagnetic attack. It'll be an attack through drugs that are infiltrating our country. It'll be an attack that comes through your phone and hacks your brain because you're not paying attention. So they're still out there. Don't rest, because it'll happen again.
I still Clarence, and I see a lot of young people out there that's going to be our leaders shortly, and I just want to say that I want to back up on something that Michael said. Prepare yourself. That's what September 11 taught me. It amazed me how we came together, but then after that we kind of separated again. But we were really together on September 11 and afterwards. I've often asked myself, it took me a lot of time to get to reach this point, but I just asked myself, why would you run into a burning building to save strangers, people you never met before? And I came to the conclusion that it's for the love of people. I have had, well, let me tell you what's going on with me. Oh, by the way, when I was telling you about the fire marshal earlier, I was wearing my glasses, so I couldn't have seen him because my glasses were covered with dust. When I took them off, that's when I saw the EMS guys. But I'm going to be happy in proportion to the happiness that I bring into the lives of others. And one last thing, if I can come in to your building, your apartment, your house, and find you and bring you out, and you've lived there for 10, 20, 30 years and you can't get out, something is wrong with this picture. I'm trained, so you can train yourself. There's stuff online, and sometimes we get trapped. But I've seen people jump in unnecessarily. Sometimes we just hunker down and wait. The guys are coming, let them know. I can tell you stories where I had to hunker down, you know. The guys are coming to get you. You hear the sirens coming in. So my point is, just train yourself. And the last thing, I've lived a life of service, and I charge you to live a life of service, because I believe that service is the rent that we pay for the privilege of being a U.S. citizen. Thank you, guys.
I guess I would say just a common theme, what Chris said before. Look, you saw the worst in humanity that day. And as I said, you know, a tragedy is something that happens by accident or, you know, through fate. You know, a homicide or a murder is something that happens with intention, and that's what happened that day. Let's be clear about what transpired. But that was the ugly part. The beautiful part was the unity that people have, and I'll give you a couple of quick examples. So when I sent everybody, or told everybody just go back to the hotels, you know, when I walked in the hotel, I went to the front desk and I told them, look, you know, I'm the manager from the Morgan Stanley class. You know, obviously everything has happened. That hotel could not have treated me any better. They set me up in a command center, as I said before, gave me every resource possible to help. And at one point, you know, I actually went into the streets to look for people, because even though we were only together for a day and a half, it was like I remembered some people's faces. And there were people literally walking around in shock. And I was going up to them, grabbing them, and telling them, come into the hotel. Okay, let's get you situated. Let's you know, begin the process of figuring this through. And it was an interesting day because I'm not a trained psychologist, but people were panicking and people were, so I'm giving out my credit card to, I don't know how many people, and just sending them to the bar. I didn't know what else to do with them, you know, to try to calm them down. And I give out my credit cards, send them to the bar. Anyway, worked the entire day. And then I go down to the bar, it's about 1 o'clock in the morning, and I'm like, okay, this is probably gonna be one hell of a tab. And I remember going to the bartender, I said, look, I gave my credit cards, my last name is Van Scoik, you know. He goes, oh yeah, we got you. I go, okay. I go, how much is it? He goes, nothing. He goes, you pay for nothing. He goes, God bless you. And I remember walking outside, and the U.S. Marshals and New York State Troopers were both based out of the Southgate at this point. And I'm talking to a trooper and talking to a couple of marshals. And I'm smoking a cigarette. Shouldn't smoke, that's bad for you. Okay, but I'm smoking a cigarette. I'll probably smoke one when this is done. Okay, but smoking a cigarette. And I walked behind the hotel, and Clarence and I talked about this last night. And I didn't even realize that there was a fire battalion that was behind the hotel. And I saw, I guess I don't know what they did or how they got it back, but there was a crushed fire truck. And I imagined it coming out of the battalion all red and beautiful and looking great. And now it was compressed, and it was covered in soot. And somebody etched in, God bless America, in the soot. And at that point, it hit me, my God, what happened today? It struck me, and to this day, we'll never forget it. And I would add one story real quick before I turn to you. So I was relocated a week after, immediately went back to work. And we were telling this story before. I moved back in with my parents, which, by the way, there's nothing wrong with doing. Move back in with your parents. Okay, let them worry about everything. Okay, but I moved back in with my parents in Yonkers, and I would have to commute back to Midtown because I had a job in Midtown Manhattan. Anyway, when you came into Grand Central, a lot of people don't remember this, but the first, let's say, month or so after 9/11, you had to walk through a hallway. And in the hallway, there were posters of missing people, because obviously people were not 100% accounted for, you know, from the Trade Center. And I would walk through that. I wouldn't look. One day I looked, and I saw a picture of a couple I knew that worked for a company called Car Futures. It used to be part of Dean Witter, which was where I worked before it became Morgan Stanley. And I knew them really well. And they were on the 101st floor in Car Futures. And I saw them, beautiful couple. But similar to your story, obviously they perished that day. She was 7 months pregnant. So there weren't 2 people that died, there were 3. And I gotta be honest with you, I'm not a cyborg, but I'd say I walked about 2 blocks afterwards. I had to pull myself over on the street because I just started crying. I couldn't stop. And I couldn't get out of my mind that these good people were murdered. Don't forget the value of the great country we live in. Don't forget the value of the great life that God has granted us. And all of you I look at these young faces. God bless you all. It's worth fighting for.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Mike.
While we were going down the stairs, we got to the 50th floor when suddenly my colleague David, who, as I mentioned earlier, had flown in the night before from our office headquarters, which actually was in California. And David suddenly on the 50th floor said, "Mike, we're going to die. We're not going to make it out of here." And I said in my best, nice, loudest voice, because I got a secondary teaching credential while I was getting my master's degree in physics from the University of California at Irvine. Go anteaters. Anyway, I also got a secondary teaching credential, and I love to say, in jest, of course, but I took that secret course that teachers never talk about, Voice 101, how to yell at students. Anyway, I said to David in my loudest, sharpest voice, "Stop it, David. If Roselle and I can go down these stairs, so can you." Because he had just said, "We're going to die. We're not going to make it out of here." And he told me that brought him out of his funk, which is what I intended. And he said, "I got to take my mind off of all of this. I want to walk a floor below you and tell you what I see on the stairs. Is that okay?" And I said, "Sure." Did I need him to do that? No. Would it have made a difference? Probably not. But if it helped him, it was great. So, for example, I got to the 45th floor, and suddenly I heard him say, "Hey, Mike, I'm at the 44th floor of the tower. This is where the cafeteria is. Not stopping, going on down the stairs." And every floor I got to, he was one floor below me shouting up what he saw. I remember that because clearly David shouting to me had to be heard by hundreds, maybe thousands of people on the stairs, and that had to help them not panic because they were hearing someone say, "I'm okay, I'm going down the stairs." And he did that until we got down to the very bottom. And I will never forget that because I think that's one of the most important things and one of the most unsung episodes that I recall from September 11th, how he, whether he knew it or not, had to be keeping so many people from panicking on the stairs. The thing that I will also take away from this, and I talk about it when I speak, is what I heard that voice say in my head: "Don't worry about what you can't control." The reality is, focus on the things you can control. That's probably only about 5% of all the stuff that we worry about. And I wrote about it in my latest book, Live Like a Guide Dog, True Stories from a Blind Man and His Dogs About Being Brave, Overcoming Adversity, and Moving Forward in Faith. And I talk about it in my first book, Thunderdog, which was about the World Trade Center and Roselle and me. But the bottom line is, we worry about so many things rather than focusing on just the things that we really need to focus on. It doesn't mean don't be aware, it doesn't mean don't be afraid, but use your fear to focus you and don't allow it to overwhelm, or as I would put it, blind you. And the fact is that is something that we all can do. And so I would say, as you've heard so many times already, this war is not over. It's not an Islamic war or anything like that. It's thugs. It's people who want to have their way with all of us. And they're not going to get their way because we have already shown and will continue to show the greatness of this country and why we're so much better than the people who try to do us in, because people understand who we are, what we are, and why we are. So don't ever forget that, and just keep going and help make the good guys win at all things. Thank you.
God bless. All set, sir.
Thank you.
Mind if I pet the dog?
I know we're a few minutes over. We also started a few minutes late. I just want to close with one statement that I actually saw in an interview that Clarence did about 7 years ago on ABC, and I think it's very fitting for closing remarks today. And it says, "When people stop remembering, that's when we perish." So never forget. Thank you.
Forget.
Good job, sir.